Hey gang, it's Squill, and can you believe we're at the penultimate episode of Fionna and Cake? I gotta say, I'm definitely gonna miss talking about this miniseries. It's been a lot of fun, but hopefully I can still find ways to bring it up in future Adventure Time videos. Hey gang, future Squill, and this is a little awkward. Fionna and Cake was greenlit for a second season. Obviously, I recorded this before that happened, which is why, in this video, I'm sort of treating Casper and Nova as if it's the penultimate episode of the show, when that is not the case anymore. I just wanted to clear up that confusion. So, yeah. Alright, back to the video. Casper and Nova is the 9th episode of Fionna and Cake, and essentially acts as a part 1 to a 2-part finale. I was pretty harsh towards these last couple episodes when they first released, but have my opinions changed in any way? Well, let's find out. Also, for these last couple episodes, there's no cold open. They just start off on a title card like a normal Adventure Time episode. I wonder why they chose to do it like this. The episode starts off on a dream sequence in which Fionna wakes up to a newly magical version of her world. Love the art style they use for this place. The visuals within this entire sequence are just great. It was also great getting to see a magical version of Hunter, probably something we couldn't have gotten in any other context. Once Fionna and Cake reunite, they decide to go back to the city to celebrate. However, once they get there, they realize that both Gary and Marshall have turned into horrific monsters. There's some great imagery here, such as these Fionna and Cake pastries that Gary makes, along with the landscape increasingly becoming more and more chaotic. But when it comes to unsettling imagery, that shot of Simon in the freezer easily takes the cake. On a symbolic level, it's pretty obvious that this represents Fiona's guilt towards letting Simon sacrifice himself for her world, but goddamn if it doesn't give me chills every time I watch it. No pun intended. After this point, Fionna wakes up, relieved to realize that her world is the same as it was before. Once Fionna gets up, she finds Gary and Marshall on a date. Fiona's reaction to Gary and Marshall holding hands was absolutely adorable, and Gary and Marshall's reaction to Cake being able to talk and shapeshift was hilarious. The episode then cuts to Simon waking up in Gulb's Void. It is here that we're once again greeted with the Lich. The Lich's speech here is very interesting, talking about how now that he's achieved his goal of extinguishing all life, he feels empty and hollow inside. Like I said last episode, it's definitely a little strange to see such a self-reflective version of the Lich, but it works well in this context and is an interesting take on his character. Simon trying to relate to the Lich here was absolutely wild. Like, my dude, it's the Lich. And he kicks him too? Like, are you crazy? And at this point, Golbetty reveals herself. I love how absolutely massive Golbetty is compared to Simon and the Lich. It helps make her feel so alien and otherworldly. And man, seeing Golbetty take care of the Lich like he's nothing was some wild imagery. The scene does a great job showing just how powerful Betty's become, that she can take the Lich apart in an instant. After this, we get my favorite scene of the episode, which is Simon apologizing to Betty for wasting his chance at a new life. Needless to say, Tom Kenny's performance here is impeccable, nailing the regretful tone in Simon's voice. The scene confirms that when Simon was doing his ritual back in Simon Petrikov, it wasn't to try and get Betty back, but to see her one last time. By the start of Fionna and Cake, Simon had already given up trying to get Betty back, so it makes sense why he seemed a lot more depressed than he did in Obsidian. During the Obsidian era, he was probably still finding ways to get Betty back, which made him feel a lot more lively and upbeat, even though he was likely still depressed to some extent. But by the start of Fionna and Cake, all of his methods to get her back were exhausted, so his only hope was just to talk to her one last time. By this point, Simon and Betty have basically swapped roles, where Simon is the one trying to make a sacrifice for Betty. I love the detail of Golbetty's pupils shaking out of anger when they see Simon putting on the crown again. Before Simon can put the crown on, Golbetty freezes him in place. I like that this shows what Betty's wish meant back in Come Along With Me, for the power to keep Simon safe. It's interesting that, at least to some extent, Betty probably knew that Simon would try finding ways of messing with his own mind again, and wanted to prevent that from happening. This probably explains why the portal formed at the end of last episode, right when Simon was about to put the crown on. After this, we cut to Shermie and Beth in U1000+, and this is where my issues with the episode start to arise, as I have pretty mixed thoughts on the Shermie and Beth stuff in these last 2 episodes. On the one hand, I find all of the Shermie and Beth stuff in this episode in a vacuum to be enjoyable. Shermie and Beth themselves are fun characters, and it's great to explore U1000+ some more. However, I don't think Shermie and Beth work here as a part of Simon's story. I honestly feel a little shoehorned in here. Like, I get that Gold Betty beamed Simon's mind into Shermie's body so that he could find the Casper and Nova book. But at that point, why not just beam Simon into the Casper and Nova story itself? Or just give him the book without sending him into the future? Because as is, Shermie and Beth don't really hold any thematic relevance to Simon's story. Which is a shame because I think they could have. Like, if we're going back to U1000+, why not do something with Ice Thing? Like, what if Simon sees this version of himself who is fully engulfed by the crown's power? What if he thinks that this could be him if he puts the crown back on? It's just kinda weird to me that Fionna and Cake had 2 different opportunities to do something interesting with Ice Thing, and yet it never took them. I definitely don't dislike Shermie and Beth being here conceptually. Like I said, I still enjoyed seeing them. I guess it's just that, to me at least, they feel like they're here to serve as a backdoor pilot for an U1000+ spinoff, rather than because they feel like a natural part of Simon's story. A spinoff that I definitely want to see one day, don't get me wrong, I just wish it didn't take up so much of Simon and Betty's story. Anyways, back in Gold Betty's Void, we get a scene of Scarab waking up and attempting to kill Simon, thus destroying the Fionna world. Gold Betty is able to stop this, however, by turning Scarab into a bunch of bugs. However, one of the bugs makes it into Simon's head anyways. After this, we cut back to Fionna World, where Fionna and Cake are telling Gary and Marshall about what's been going on. I like that Fionna is still showing some guilt towards transforming people against their will. I also really like the group dynamic in these last couple episodes between Fionna, Cake, Gary, Marshall, and eventually Hunter. Despite some of them having never interacted before, it feels like they could have all been friends for a very long time. Great group dynamic all around. Anyways, Fionna opens a portal door in order to try to talk to Simon again, however she's greeted with a bunch of scarab bugs instead. Back to U1000+, Simon and Beth finally reach the library. I really love the design of this place, raises a lot of interesting questions. Personally, I want to know what happened to Turtle Princess. This whole sequence is very fun, love seeing the pagelines return. I wonder what caused them to mutate. Simon finds a book about ancient artifacts with a picture of the crown on it, and from there, he and Beth escape. Meanwhile, the gang in Fionna World are still taking care of the scarab bugs. The sequence is definitely fun, but once again, it's hard to take Scarab as an actual serious threat. We then get a scene of Prismo trying to break out of his cube, his only scene in this episode. I don't really have anything to say about this, I just figured it was worth mentioning. Back at Fiona's apartment, the gang has captured all of the scarab bugs. Fionna doesn't know what to do when Cake reveals that she gave Simon her phone. Fionna already knowing Gary's password before he could tell her was hilarious, and definitely my favorite joke in the episode. Unfortunately, Simon can't answer as he's still trapped in Shermie's body. It was cool to see Simon and Beth sit by the old fern tree, likely confirming that this does take place after the U1000+ scenes in Come Along With Me. Simon and Beth open the book, which is where the Casper and Nova title finally comes into play. I really love the aesthetics here, it feels like an old PS1 game. The game is basically structured like a choose-your-own adventure book. Outside of the aesthetics, I don't really have a ton to say about it for now, as it'll play a much bigger role next episode. We get one last scene in Fionna World where the gang decides to split up and look for portals. However, while they're gone, LSP frees all of the scarab bugs. This causes Scarab to reform, ending the episode on a cliffhanger. Casper and Nova is kind of a hard episode to talk about on its own. While most Fionna and Cake episodes feel like they can still be enjoyed as their own individual stories separate from the rest of the season, Casper and Nova definitely feels like a part 1 of the finale. That being said, I still like the episode, I just don't love it. I think the episode kind of peaks in its first half with that cool dream sequence and all of the Simon, Lich, and Golbetti stuff. Once Jeremy and Beth enter the picture, the rest of the episode, while still good, definitely doesn't reach those same highs as the first half. And yeah, I still have mixed feelings about Shermie and Beth being here at all, but I've gone on about that for long enough. Still a good episode all around, just on the weaker end of the season, at least in my opinion. But with that, please let me know how you all feel about this episode in the comments. And please stay tuned for my review of the final episode of Fionna and Cake. Squill out.